Hey, I'm Sheena Shuey. I'm a registered social worker and host of the 4Q podcast. I'm passionate about normalising, not pathologising life, and that's not easy. So each episode, I have amazing guests on to share the messy, beautiful ups and downs of life in 4 key questions with tips and tricks along the way. There are moments in life where you can embrace your story and understand that it's okay not to feel okay sometimes. So let's get into it. This is the 4Q podcast. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the 4Q podcast. Again, I'm so happy that you're here, taking the time out for you and really learning about why you are the way you are. I think that's incredibly brave, incredibly noble, incredibly good to do that and leaning into, okay, well, I'm not okay, or I am okay, but I'd want to do better, or I want to improve myself. I want to understand the world better. I think that the people who are here listening to this now really are amazing people. And so I'm so thankful that I get to share some of my knowledge, my experience with you, and just to give you my unique perspective. You know, I've mentioned again in a recent podcast that there's no unique messengers, only unique messages. No unique messages, only unique messengers. That's a unique way to say that. So let's jump into today's topic, which is 7 environmental reasons you're anxious or strung out. Now, I'll list the 7 reasons and then go into them because they all overlap quite a bit. So the 7 reasons that I've listed, and don't forget there are many more to this as well, but these are 7 of the reasons that I've listed. Lack of community and identity and support, capitalism, toxic workplaces, social expectations of your gender role, mainstream news hype, reliance on government and corporations, and poor social policy. So I kind of want to break this down again a little bit. If you're new here, or if maybe it's always worth hearing things several times to really get it in. You know, when I was hearing about capitalism and community breakdown, it wasn't something that clicked with me straight away, and I didn't quite understand it. So it's always helpful to hear this, and remembering that in my social work degree, I learnt about the philosophy around capitalism and some of the history about it came about. So this all comes from the philosophy of it, as well as the evidence that we can see. So capitalism breaks communities down in this way. It breaks communities down because it then puts the value on capital. That is gross domestic product, which is how much can you produce? How much money can you make? How much stuff can you make? It doesn't put value on, are you happy? Are you socially supported? Do you have family or friends or community that care about you? None of that matters. What matters under capitalism is growth. Every single year, you want to be making more, doing more, producing more. And so in an environment like that, where let's say you had a successful family business where maybe it's a farm, maybe you employ locals in the community, you have a family farm that's got your family members in it, some locals from the community, your produce goes to your local community, so it's not exported, imported, it's literally like a self-sufficient kind of thing. You make it, they buy from it, everybody's happy because the money and the produce from it stays within the community, and you all support each other. You all know each other's families, and you all pick up the slack and you produce what's needed. But you may not be growing every year. You may not be producing, exporting or importing or trying to grow the company to a place that it's out of control. All you're doing is serving your community, and it works for you because maybe on that farm you make a strict policy that you start at 6 a.m. but you finish at midday when the sun is the hottest or whatever. So you're able to successfully run this business, hiring family and friends and supporting your community, working 6 hours a day, but you're not fitting into the capitalist mindset. That kind of business is not valued. A capitalist business would much rather you scale it, import, export. So instead of hiring locals, hiring the cheapest possible worker that you could have, and then making as much profit as you can have, and maybe that produce gets shipped overseas. So you're not supporting your community anymore. Maybe you're hiring, different people who could obviously benefit from that, but that's a whole thing. And so you can see how capitalist workplaces, which are toxic often, hence the two overlap, is they are often driven by growth. Okay, did we make more than last year? How can we be more efficient? How can we make more money? How can we make more stuff? How can we increase sales? Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about small or medium businesses. And just to clarify, a small business in the US is 20 million, right? So I myself would love to be a millionaire. I'm not bagging out millionaires at all. We can all aim to be successful business people with several businesses. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, these large scale companies that you might see in every single town you go to. So think of maybe things like Woolworths, McDonald's, all of that, where how can local businesses possibly compete with that, right? A local grocer is going to have to charge more because they're not going to, they're going to hire people for higher rates. They're going to want more quality produce. And if we don't value that, how on earth are they possibly going to compete with something like Woolworths that has everything you could possibly think of at the cheapest possible price because they're ripping off our farmers, right? So if you work in that toxic workplace, it's really hard to not be anxious or strung out because there's this constant competitiveness and pressure in that environment. So, and then you can see how with capitalism, you start to lack community identity and support because you're not engaging in your community. So if you think about traditional life, you would have a local cabinet maker, so someone who does the painting in the community, someone who does the, this, everybody has their role in the community. But now our community is global, which means that on a small scale, we're really suffering. And so we don't have that community identity or support. Many of us don't know our neighbours. We don't have people who, if we needed some help, if we needed to support each other, that'd be great. I remember growing up and neighbours would drop leftovers off. And, if my parents were going out for a few hours and they needed me not there, the neighbours would be totally fine for me to be there because we all knew each other. That doesn't happen anymore. And so we're all strung out because we just don't have people supporting us. We used to have cousins and aunties and uncles and friends and family in our neighborhood who we could rely on. And we just don't have that anymore. I think just moving on from all of that is social expectations of your gender role. That if being a woman, being a man, being other genders as well, whatever your gender may be across the spectrum, all come with societal expectations of how you act, what is expected, and where your shame comes from. So for women, shame, as Brené Brown's research shows, is around motherhood and appearance, and for men, it's being seen as weak. And although we've come a long way, that's still very much there. You know, I work with many women, and many of the households that I still work with to this day, men are the providers, women are the child rearers, the taking care of children, taking care of the household. Those traditional roles are still around. And, you know, men feel the pressure from that. Women feel the pressure from that. Plus, women are supposed to work on top of that. Women are meant to be self-sacrificing and feminine and quiet, and all these expectations that, although we as a society are undoing, we are still have a long way to go, because, yeah, there's so much around that. And I guess that's what leads to poor social policy too. So we encourage women, which is another, you know, of these environmental reasons. One of the social policies I think is the worst is in Australia, our childcare rebate and our childcare system. So we expect women to work. You get penalised financially if you don't. But if you do, you get penalised for sending your child to childcare. So often you're only making not much more after you pay for childcare. And it's just a really poor social policy that doesn't work. And I guess there are so many initiatives that could work so much better. So, and I guess that's what we see with capitalism, is that countries that have community support and don't have that, you think the Mediterranean and Southeast Asia, there's many countries that don't have aged care and they don't have childcare because the community takes care of each other. So they haven't had to create those institutions. Imagine that. I think as Australians, it's so hard to imagine what we do without it. But imagine if there was all these neighbourhood people, all the kids knew each other, everybody knew each other, and you didn't have to pay for childcare. So if you do choose to go to work, there was someone to help out with you, family member, grandparent, whatever, and you didn't have to pay childcare. So all the money that you made from work actually could go back into making your family grow and creating generational wealth, not keeping people poor or stuck. So that's what I mean by poor social policy. This is affecting all of us and how we feel. We're in this constant battle and grind and dependence on the system, which is what I mean by reliance on government and corporations. You know, if Woolworths and the government and all of these things shut down, what would you do? What would you do? You know, I've been meaning to have a veggie patch forever. It is on my to-do list, but I'm not a gardener, and, you know, our backyard is a mess because of our dogs. And so, but one of the easiest ways people can break free from that reliance is having your own veggie patch, having your own food sources. Food is such a big thing that if, you know, we were ever in a worst case scenario, that would be the thing you need. You need food to survive. You need access to clean water to survive, access to clean air. And, you know, it's incredible that we get charged to have access to water, which is something that we need. So just thinking about how are you so reliant on these, because if you weren't reliant on your work to sustain your lifestyle, so let's say you managed to create a home and a life that was relatively cheap to run, you wouldn't be dependent on work and you'd have much more time to think about important issues. So that's another reason why we're anxious and strung out, because we're stuck in systems where inevitably we need to work 40 hours a week because we end up creating lifestyles that are super expensive. Not intentionally, that's just what you do. You get a house, right? So And you have education, which usually costs money. So, and then finally, one of the last things, the seventh thing, is mainstream news hype. So I guess we know that mainstream media, they like a good story. And, of course they do. It's what sells. But news nowadays, because it's no longer a public service, it's run by profitable companies, there is so much hype, so much drama in the news, so many news effects, and, newspapers have those crazy headlines. Whereas when we privatized, when we had a public news service, so there was no profits to be made. It was literally telling the public, okay, this is what you need to know in your town or in your area, not even on a global scale, unless it was super important, like World War I, World War II, things like that. But we weren't flooded with information when we had, different news media. But also it wasn't so much hype. It was literally just stating facts and just stating what you need to know rather than creating hype and drama. I often don't watch mainstream media. I just need to find out what I need to know. And half the time I go to work, like my paid work, and my work colleagues let me know what I need to know. But, when I do find myself watching news, there's so much pizzazz around it, and there's so much hype, and there's no factual information. It's hard to know fact from fiction. It's hard to know which experts to trust and which to not. So it gets really confusing. So I want you to think about all of these things in your life and how they could impact in you. So, your lack of social support, the lack of community, the lack of, so much financial dependence on our governments and on workplaces and corporations, toxic workplaces. How would you feel if you only had to work 20 hours a week? During that 20 hours, you had friends or family or community members that were taking care of your children or taking care of whatever needed to be taken care of, and you were doing okay. And the job that you did, you loved and you got to be creative in, and it wasn't toxic and capitalist driven. How different a life that may feel than the ones we all are stuck in now. So I encourage you to think about that. If you enjoyed some of these ideas, let's talk further. I can go deeper in this, but I want to know that you want to hear it. So if you enjoyed this and you want to go deeper, let's go deeper, or send me a message. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram or any other way. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to invest in you, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I know that we don't see each other face to face, but having you here means more than you could know. I really appreciate it, and I really hope that my thoughts and my energy and my unique voice to a non-unique message, because everything I've said today has been said before, just not in the way that I approach it. But I hope that these unique messages really resonate with you. All right. Love to connect, and I will see you at the next episode of the 4Q podcast. Thanks for joining me.